All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming back and listening to Mama Melly, the manager. I'm Melissa, and I have a special guest today, Avisha Sloat. That's, yes, how you pronounce it, right? You said.
Yes.
So Avisha is a colleague and friend of mine that also is a manager or regional director at Segment. And I think I openly can say are one of the few minorities, different
Yes,
looking managers.
definitely.
And after we had finally met in person a couple weeks ago in Denver, San Francisco. I can't even
San
keep track.
Francisco. Yeah.
Yeah, San Francisco. I knew I wanted to invite her onto the podcast because we have a lot of things in common. Management, being in the tech world, minority in the tech world, female in the tech world, and have one child around the same age, and we're both expecting our second. So we're pretty much the same person at this point.
Yeah. And, not a lot going on, right? Just like super low key, easy breezy lives.
Yes, exactly. So for those listening, I wanted to invite Avisha on to talk about a few topics. Hopefully we'll cover kind of an array of things, but the most important I'd love, Avisha, is just to give a little introduction of yourself. Like, where are you from? I know you got into tech or into sales 11 years ago. Like, what kicked that off, and kind of just whatever background you'd like to share.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad to be here. This is the first time I've been on a podcast, but I love listening to them whenever I get a chance to go for a walk in the middle of the day. Like you mentioned, my name's Avisha. I live in San Jose, and I've been in tech sales for going on 12 years. And I think the thing that kicked off sales or wanting to be in sales for me is, first, my mom is in sales. So from a very young age, she's in travel sales and hospitality. So I got to like witness that. My mom was always working and traveling and set that example for us that like you could do it all, which I think is not totally 100% accurate, but you can do a lot even if you're a working mom. She being in sales, she had the flexibility to sometimes come to field trips or pick us up after school, and she also always somehow had dinner on the table, and it was like amazing homemade meals every night. But then I also, after college, I came out of college during the 2009 recession, or 2008, 2009. So the job market wasn't amazing. And I was really lucky that I had parents who were like, go travel, go do something if you don't want to, because I was working at Target at the time and living at home just to try to like get a paycheck. And when I went traveling, I started talking to strangers. I was backpacking through India and Southeast Asia by myself. And I just started talking to people and asking them like, well, where did you go next? And why did you like that? And I mean, like when I think about sales, it's a lot like these types of relationships. Any kind of relationship can relate to sales, right? Like understanding why people are doing the things they're doing. What are the things they care about? Why aren't they going to do something? Those are all like facets of being a salesperson, and also just trying to build relationships with people. So I came back and wanted to be in tech sales, and that's where I went from there. I focused in on how do I get into it. I knew I needed to be an SDR first, and so a sales development rep. And I got my first break at Gigya, which later got acquired by SAP. So started as an SDR there, and then moved into an AE role. From there, I spent 4 years at Gartner selling into tech startups in the Bay Area, which was a great opportunity for field sales. Went back to the SaaS side after that. And then I've been at Segment. It's going to be 3 years in November.
I guess I didn't realize it had been that long. But so did you join after or before the acquisition? Twilio
like right after, like a month after.
So that was probably craziness.
It was actually like not a lot changed, more changed because I also joined Segment and I was 5 months pregnant.
Oh yes, and that's definitely something I want to get into. Okay, so when you were a BDR, so I think that's one thing. When I started my sales career, I was an admin first, and I was like, oh, I want to get into sales. for a lot of reasons that you said, right? Like relationship building, like the uniqueness of trying to understand the psychology of like why someone's going to buy versus not. Like it's really complex. I'm sure there's like, we have some desire for, what's it called? Glutton for punishment, because sales also is like
Oh yeah,
hard a lot
it's
of times.
harsh.
Yeah. But then I think, yeah, going into Salesforce, when I went from an account manager to a BDR, I was like, ooh, like this kind of step back. But then I realized like being a BDR, you get a lot of the soft skills that you, if you skip that step, like it's definitely a disadvantage to you. Is there anything that you think was the biggest like pro coming out of that BDR role, or something that helped you the most going from BDR to AE?
I mean, anytime I talk, and especially now being in the position where you're interviewing folks to try to see if they would be a good salesperson, and the nature of our team is that they're younger in their careers, this might be their first sales role. I want to understand like what are the things you've done to be successful at just cold outbounding? How do you get into or not? Because and I've talked to my team about this. I remember some of the accounts I went into cold and got meetings and saw them turn into like closed won opportunities. Obviously, I handed it off from the point when that first meeting happened, but there's still points of pride for me, right? And I think successful salespeople are literally always prospecting. Like there should never be a time where you're like, I have an SDR or BDR to do this for me. Like if you want to eat, you should be filling your own pipe with that, right? Like you can't rely on someone else. And I think that's like my mantra across my team is like you control what you can control. And the biggest thing you can control is how you spend your time finding pipeline. And if you're not doing that, then you're missing out on a huge component of the job.
Yeah, I think that's such an that's such an important component. And so I'd be curious your take on, when I interview, I do struggle between, do I want someone who's been a BDR for 2, maybe going on 3 years at a SaaS company who hasn't closed yet, or, take the risk of someone who's been an AE but never was a BDR. But I think your question on how do you outbound prospect, like the response to that is huge. Do you prefer like one profile over the other? I think hiring is honestly the most difficult thing about being
I mean, and I just moved into leadership for the first time last July. So I'm coming up on 1 year, and this has been the hardest job. Like there's so much outside of your control. And obviously I like having control. You're trying to understand human nature and these different profiles and how do you manage each of them. But to answer your question, like, I think that there's a chance that you could be in an AE role and have never done the role of like had the title of a BDR, but you still know how to go out and like look at your territory and strategically figure out what your top opportunities are going to be and how do you break into those accounts. Like as long as you have that ability to look at it from like that business perspective of like, here's why and here's why now, for the conversation you're trying to start with them, like that's just as valuable. I think the question I always ask in hiring is like, tell me about a meeting or like an opportunity that you sourced that you were most proud of, because I do interview a lot of people who have no sales experience. So like just trying to understand like how do they go about it? How do they break down the company to figure out who they should be reaching out to? What was the message that they think really resonated? How did they come up with that? Because it's like that blend of art and science too, right? They have to be doing a certain number of outreach in addition to being creative and tailored in the way they're reaching out to these accounts. And so I want to see like what that process looked like for them to think through it.
Yeah. And for them to be able to explain that to you then afterwards, like themselves. That's a good point. Like there are some people who have the natural drive or understanding of how to reach out and can still be good AEs without ever having been a BDR. So that's a good thing. I need to keep that in mind if we hire, if our team grows. So you mentioned the jump from AE, so either account executive or individual contributor, we use a lot of times, to management. Why did you do it? I'm curious your thought, because I think when people ask me, I'm like, what do you do? And then the biggest pros you felt so far in the last year, and then like any or all of the challenges you've had.
Well, I ask myself why I did it every day, because for the last 9 months, it's honestly feeling like you're failing every
Mhm.
day. Like
In this
it's
economy too.
harder.
Mhm.
It's harder to measure the things that are going well, right? Because a lot of it is still so metrics driven, but at least when you're in an IC role, you can see like, oh, today I made this much progress, and I can see like 1 inch of progress towards my goal, or I can see the number, on the scoreboard of like where I'm at
Mhm.
currently quarter to date. You don't, you kind of have to like reframe it across those 5 or 6 people that you have on your team of like, what is the one thing I did to help each of them today and help them get just a little bit better,
Mhm.
especially with younger account executives, less tenured. This might only be their first or second job out of college. Um, so I think the pros are like the moments, and I try to like use this to like bolster my self-esteem and feel like I'm not failing all the time. Is that the moments when I hear from someone like I provided coaching and then I immediately go and listen to their call and I see them applying that coaching.
Mhm.
um, and then I think the cons are that like so much is outside of your control. Trying to forecast for other people, trying to be in every single deal, which is impossible. You
Yep.
can't do that. You can't do it and scale and also, sustain. I think it's so similar to being a parent, honestly, because as soon as
Mhm.
you think, my daughter's turned 2 in March, and like, I think back at like when she was 1 month old, like you think like, okay, I've got this now. And then the next week something changed. And
Mhm.
then you catch on to that and you're like, okay, I've got this now. And then 2 weeks later, there's a leap or like whatever. There's always something changing and it happens so quickly that like your measurement of what good looks like is constantly changing to just keep up with where you're at in that stage of life, right?
Yeah.
And that's how it feels managing like this team. Like you just have to keep resetting, like, okay, it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to
Mhm.
be good enough. And I just have to take like these small wins to keep me going.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. I think I think a handful of people, and again, I've never done this research, but that go into sales as AEs do it because they do like the control. And then to go to management is like complete like hypocrisy to it because you lose a lot. And I think for me, that was the biggest thing. And I also became a manager, let's see, 4 months after I came back from mat leave. So my emotions, my hormones were like all over the place. I think that was probably some of the most challenging days in my career, post college life ever. It was becoming a first time manager of a team I previously worked alongside
Oh,
remotely. So like, right, like not meeting these people and like being a new mom. And I just remember like using a hand-free like pump bra, trying to work and then becoming
mm-hmm,
a manager. I was like, this is insanity. Like,
mm-hmm,
what did I do? Can I go back? Like
mm-hmm.
all these things. But yeah, I definitely think there's like the moments where you see the growth in the AEs, or like they even give you the feedback of like, hey, I really appreciate the like confidence that you're giving, or something like that. It's like, okay,
Yeah,
this is rewarding. But then
yeah,
there's so much other stuff, and you're right. I call them my children. Like
yeah.
I have Manny at home and my husband, so I have 2 kids at home, and then I have my 6 kids at work. And I know, like, I see all these things, just like your colleagues aren't your family. It's like, yeah, well, when you're in your leadership, like there are certain things that you have to do because they're your responsibility if you're in sales, and like their numbers, your numbers. There's so many things. So it's like, yeah, it's hard. But then also finding that balance of I can't sell for you. Like there's that you need to do for yourself. And I'm one
Yeah.
person. I can't be on every one of your calls, but also how do I have that trust and that confidence? And yeah, I think it's a struggle.
I think one thing that, and I didn't actually answer your question. I had been in like kind of mid-market sales for, most of my career. I never made the jump to enterprise. And when my manager was leaving last year, um, he said to me like, hey, you've been on fire. This is the time to like ask for what you want from the business. So what
Yeah.
do you want? And we had like these conversations off and on. And then he's like, because I'm leaving in 2 weeks, and like I need to say it on my way out the door. Like, what does Avisha want? And I was like, okay, that's a lot of pressure, and I don't know if I can make this decision in this time. And he was like, I think you should apply for my role, which was a mid-market RD position. I was like, are you sure that I could do it? Like, I haven't managed a team.
Mhm.
And my best friend, I was telling her about it, and she was like, are you listening to what just happened? The
Yeah.
man who was doing that job is telling you to apply for it, and you're telling him that you don't think you could do it. Why are you doing that to yourself?
Yeah.
Why are you shortchanging your abilities? If the person who is just doing the job looks at you and says, I think you could do this job, apply for it. What's the worst they could say?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
So, and honestly, it was great. And honestly, I didn't get that. I got a growth role instead because I hadn't managed a team before. But I don't know why I put so much self-doubt in my own way of like, if I could or couldn't do the job, when someone who had just done it
Because
was
we're
telling me to go
women.
for it.
Because we're women and we're used to being told like all of these things.
I need to be
It's
100% ready for it before I'm
yes.
like qualified, right?
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
absurd.
Or if like you don't hit one of like the requirements on the job description, like, oh no, I can never do it. Like applying to Twilio, I would never have applied at Twilio, but someone referred me in person to Doug, and he like reached out to me on LinkedIn. He's like, hey, this person said you'd be a good fit. Like, would you? And I got the job description. I'm like, what the fuck is an API? I can't work here. And yeah, here I am like 4 years later. So it's wild that like mentally we automatically go to no, I can't do, like doubting ourselves. But I'm glad you still applied. And I think starting in growth, I don't know if starting in growth is like easier or anything, because
Oh,
too,
I think
especially
it's
at a
more
company here.
challenging.
Yeah, especially at a company here where it's like what do they say, that like growth is like what keeps the food on the table. Like we're supposed to get these transactional deals, and like right now we're not getting them. Like, oh my gosh.
But we're
It's
also
so
working like super complex sales cycles.
yeah.
A growth business is normally, yeah, like you said, transactional, they move quickly. But the nature of our product
That
is
was
that it still has to be multi-threaded. It still has to be, like an enterprise level sales,
yes.
but at growth numbers and with growth size companies.
Yeah,
And with growth AEs, honestly, who just aren't enterprise sellers. So I
exactly.
think
Yeah.
for many of the AEs, if they can be successful in this role, it bodes well for their future in sales, because they're learning some of these skills that a lot of folks don't learn unless they move into enterprise. But yeah, it's really tough. It's really the hardest job besides being a mom, the hardest thing I've ever done in my life.
So I think that's a fantastic transition. Sorry, but it's like our indoor outdoor cat is getting really needy. So mom life. So I think something you had mentioned when one of first met you is that you interviewed at Twilio while pregnant. I think that's one of the most courageous things, because I'm obviously pregnant right now. And as you know, the tech world, Twilio itself, like things are challenging, but I always like, even when I was only like 2 months pregnant, I was like, I can't look for another job. Like no one's going to want me. Like I'm technically damaged goods because in how many ever months I'm leaving. And thankfully, when I interviewed for the manager role, I remember calling the hiring manager, who was Raul, who now runs All Flex. It's like, I'm pregnant. Are you sure you still want me to start for you? Like, I'm going to have to leave for mat leave in August. And he's like, well, I don't care. Like, that's really great. I'm like, okay, cool. But not everyone's like that. So like,
oh no,
how did you get the courage to interview? Did you even think about it twice? And how was that process?
I knew that I wanted to find a company that was going to be okay with me taking my mat leave. And I also, it was the middle of the pandemic. I was pregnant, in July. I found out in July of 2020. I was due in March of 2021. And I was getting to the point where I was like, I need to find a role that is going to be the right fit for me, but also be aware that like I'm pregnant, because I had gotten an offer with another company. And when I did tell them I was pregnant, I had paused things with Segment, because I was like, I'm in the middle of like, I'm about to get an offer and I don't feel right continuing down this process with you guys. So I actually had gotten the offer. And when I told them I was pregnant, they said, oh, like the most we could do is like 6 weeks unpaid. And I was like, well, okay, like let's not even talk about the unpaid part. 6 weeks isn't even enough time for like recovery from
physical
yes,
birthing of
your
a child. 6
body
weeks.
is going through trauma. And I was like, I'm a first time mom. I don't know if I'm going to need a C-section, which is an 8-week minimum. And they were like, oh, okay, well, like, we really want you to join our team. So like, come back to us after you give birth and have your maternity leave with your current company, and we'd love to hire you. And I was like, well, you just showed your cards. I definitely won't be coming back to you, because you don't respect that this is a huge moment in an employee's life.
Yeah.
And you're not doing anything to fight for this. And that kind of indicates to me where the company culture stands.
Exactly.
So and when I came back to Segment, and it was my recruiter, Grace, who was amazing and had told me about how she joined Segment when she was 5 months pregnant, not even knowing that I was pregnant. And she was like, it was so amazing. Like, I was welcomed with open arms. I took my mat leave. I came back, like all these things. And I was like, that's amazing. And then it made me feel more comfortable coming back to her and sharing, like, I'm actually pregnant and this is why I slowed things down. And her reaction was the same thing, like, that's amazing, we're so excited for you. And when I told the managers that I'd been interviewing with, they had the same reaction. This is such an exciting time for you. What are you having? Do you know the gender? Like all those questions. It was never a question of like, oh, would you be able to do the job? Because they know I can do the job, right? And I'm just grateful, because I think if more people thought that way, they would see how, like, I came back and I was ready to crush it. I put and my managers were like, you just came back from mat leave and like you are at zero pipeline, and that's okay. Like, it's going to take some time. And I was like, I have to prove that I like deserve to be here, because that's what drives me. Right.
Yeah.
And they were the ones who were telling me to give myself more grace. And I came back and I like worked so much harder than I'd ever had in my life, because I felt like I had something to prove, not because of them, just because of my own,
Whether that's
issues.
healthy or not. Yeah.
Yeah. Whether it's healthy or not. Yeah. It's my own anxieties. But like, I think I've just will eternally be grateful for that opportunity to them. And I'm also like aware of like, women come back, and women who come back in the workforce want to work even harder, because now we have this little person at home that we need to like show, like, this is what success looks like. This is why we're working. This is why mama takes calls late, or early or whatever. Like, I'm doing this for us, for our future, right? So oh, I'm gonna tear up.
No, I'm yeah, and I'm so glad you shared that perspective. I think coming back, I was like, okay, I was gone for so long, like now I need to come back and do all these things. And it's not necessarily truth, but I do feel like a company's mat or parental leave policy really shows a lot about the company, whether it's how progressive they are, how their culture is, with their thoughts and stance on it. And so I think obviously US based companies, Europe, like they have their own thing. Like, who was it? We had just had a manager right in Europe who came back after being gone for 12 months.
No, that was Australia, but
Australia,
amazing.
But like even for here, my husband, from his first, when we had our first, he only got 2 weeks. I was like what? Now I came back early for mine, because again, I had this like feel of like guilt and whatever, but I also came back because, so I don't know if it happened to you. It's like, I needed to come back to something I knew how to do. And like being a first time mom, I was like, what is this?
Yeah.
Why is he crying? Like, so I did come back a little early because of that. Now that I have the first, like, I think with the second, I'm going to be a lot more selfish with my mat leave. And I hope like you can be as well. Cause I think partially what we think, right, it's like, oh, we have to prove ourselves, or if we don't get back and work, like we're going to lose our position. Reality is like, that's not true, like at all. And now with 2, and one of those being a toddler, like, oh my gosh. I was going to ask, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think with this one, I'm kind of like, Jesus, take the wheel. Like, it's like, I'm at a place where I'm like, and maybe being in management has helped me get to that, because I was like very type A. I like to have a tight rein on things. But when I had my daughter, I actually, like, our roles flipped, and my husband used to be like the go with the flow one. And I was like, oh, this is just how things are, like,
Yeah.
and just like go with it. Obviously, there are like certain parenting things that I like to try to implement, and there are things that I want to do different from like what my parents did with me, because every
Mm,
generation has like different things they're trying to
yeah.
do. But that being said, like, so I'll research a lot of stuff, but I'm like very like chill with myself, like in those moments where like I'm like, okay, like I'll tell my husband, like, sometimes when my daughter, if she's having a fit or something, like, hey, like, I'm being triggered a little bit. I need to step away for a minute. Mama needs to take a moment. And now that my daughter's old enough, I tell her that, hey, like, mama needs to step away. She's feeling overwhelmed, or like we talk about emotions a lot in my
Mhm.
house. And I kind of feel like I'm taking that same mentality with like this mat leave. I'm like, I can't control this. Like, all I can do is go have a baby and then try to survive those like next few months after having a baby.
Yeah.
That's it. So like when I go on my mat leave, like whatever happens, happens. Like that's out of my control now, right? Like
Mhm.
I just need to be focused on my body, the baby I'm giving birth to, my family. That's it. That's where
Yeah.
my focus needs to be. But I
Yeah.
totally hear like, oh, I would like run away to Target as often as I could when I first gave birth to Lily, because I was like, you feel so like trapped and locked down, and everything's unfamiliar. And Target is like my happy place and my safe space. So like I would just go and walk around for like 45 minutes and then come home when I needed to like pump or feed her.
Oh my gosh, yeah, pumping, feeding. Yeah, I think so. This will be my first mat leave as a manager. So as
Same.
you know, and for the listeners, I shared in like the first episode back, like I'm on my recharge. And like the first week I was like, what's my team doing? Like, how's it going? Like all this stuff. And by now I'm like, who knows? And I mean, I kind of do, kind of don't. So I'm glad I took my recharge, because it is, I think, preparing me for mat leaves that I will take now in like 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
Because I do think hearing Melissa, who's the other RD, and at our company, talk about her mat leave and like getting the AEs prepared and doing all the stuff, I was like, oh yeah, that's like kind of feel like where I'm at. And then I thought about some more. I'm like, you know what? It's gonna be fine. They're gonna be
Mhm.
fine. We're all gonna be fine. And I already know that I'm tired right now, and the baby's not even here. Like I can't even fathom what it's going to be like,
Oh,
because it's true. You do kind of, at least, I don't know if I haven't fully forgotten like the birthing process that I think will be burnt in my memory forever, but like how bringing them home,
Mhm.
how it is like swaddling, like I don't remember all that. I know when it's here, it'll hit me, but I do know it's hard and it was miserable. And it was really challenging for me. So like,
Yeah.
I
Your
feel
brain is
better.
mush
Oh,
because you're so sleep deprived.
yeah.
Even with quote unquote good sleepers, like I think Lily
I don't
was
know
a
what it is.
good sleeper.
Yeah.
And I still remember like it is just so, and there my husband got 8 weeks, but he took 1 week when we brought her home, or like a
Mhm.
week and a half, and then he took the rest of his when I went back to work.
Oh, okay.
So like we switched. And even then I was like, I like during that first month or so, once we kind of got like we hit our stride and like we knew the pattern, when he had to start driving into work, and like because he would go into an office, I was like, go sleep in the guest room, because like I don't need you being sleep deprived. We don't need both need to be sleep
Yeah.
deprived when I can like take a nap in the middle of the day. You have to get on the road and like basically be a drunk driver at that point because you're tired.
Yeah.
And I was like, and I need you to come home, so like I'm not left alone with this child.
This child. Oh my gosh, that's so funny. And so I think that's a good point to transition. So you and I have talked the few times that we've been together, the topics of our husbands have come up because they're obviously outside of our culture, or like I'm half white, but my husband is like born and raised Irondale, Alabama white, so like very different than me. And their cultures are different. Our in-laws are very different than us. I think you wrote in like the notes of something you want to cover is just how having a child like changed your relationship. And Clay and I were reflecting on this the other day of how we could like before Manny, we could be like, hey, let's go, like, oh, we wrapped up our calls because he's in tech too. Like, early. Let's go to like the bar down the road and grab a beer. Cool. And like we were able to do these things, and it wasn't official date night, but we were able to spend that quality time together. And like now it's 8 Manny's down. I'm scrolling on my phone. He's scrolling on his phone. We have the main TV on. We do that for an hour, and then we go to bed and maybe say good night to each other. And I know, super unhealthy. Like I'm working out, but also it's like, it's such a true topic. It's like having a kid changes your relationship with your husband.
It 100% does. My husband and I used to love traveling, and obviously like the pandemic slowed that down too, but like the year before the pandemic, we went to Morocco and we went to Cabo for a friend's wedding. We went to St. Lucia. We went to the Dominican Republic. Like we were going somewhere like every quarter. We loved to travel, and I've always loved to travel, and it was something I introduced him to. And we think back on those trips and we're like, how would we take Lily to Morocco? Like, there's no way you navigate a stroller plus like full size, like rolly bags through the streets of Fez. Like that's not possible. It's all cobblestone. It's all steps. Like this is like, and we're glad that we did those things before we had her, because it took a while for us to conceive Lily, and like we struggled with that. And so we're grateful for the time we got, but like, now it's like our relationship has changed. I also have my parents who live we have a main house, and we have like an ADU or additional dwelling unit in the back. So like we spend a lot of time with my parents too. So that's another aspect of our relationship that we're navigating. We moved in October, but like I think about it, the thing that I do think I'm lucky in is that, my culture and my like the way I grew up is that like family is always around, and it's like totally normal. And that's why like my parents being here and helping me raise my daughter is like, this is amazing. Like I can't ask for more. My husband, on the other hand, like grew up like down the street from uncles and aunts, and sometimes wouldn't see them for holidays. And I was like, what do you mean? It would just be you and your parents and your brother, and that's it? Like, I can't even fathom that. But I'm really lucky that he does, like, he's okay with it, right? Like he's happy to have my mom's support. We talk about it a lot, like how lucky we are to have that. But it's also like a moment where we're like, we probably need to find ways to like be a little bit more spontaneous. Last week I texted him in the middle of the day and I was like, we're going out to dinner tonight. And I think that's something that I've realized, like, I just need to take the control sometimes, because my husband is very like, he's not a planner, not going to do that. So like, I'm trying to make a point of like in our relationship, Mother's Day, I was like, hey, what are you planning for Mother's Day? And he was like, brunch. And I was like, how about this? I'd just like you to take Lily, go get donuts, take her for a walk. And I just want to sit and drink my tea by myself for like 35 minutes. And then after that, we can hang out outside, and that's our Mother's Day. And it would be nice to get a card. And that's what we did. But I'm like focused on like telling him exactly what I need out of the relationship, because I can't expect him to read my mind, and I'm not going to let it like fester. Because I know it will.
Girl, 100%. You and I are so like, so that's the thing. I like kind of let Mother's Day be up in the air. And of course, like one little thing that like I didn't like, I was like, and again, pregnant right now, so emotionally like unstable. So I just like at the end of the day, just like bawled. And he's like, well, like next year, what do you want? I'm like, I'll tell you then. And then I realized, I'm like, yes, there's so much going on. We just had this big move. Like I'm emotional. Manny is like super demanding right now. And so like, I just need to tell him. And it's something like we worked on in our marriage there, counseling like years ago, is just be straight up. And so part of me is like, I just need to accept it. And then that way I can't be let down. And then that way it's just happy all the time. Well, not all the time, but
I think we've been conditioned to think like, oh, people are just going to know what we want. And as salespeople, we should know that you need to ask the questions and the second and third level questions to like find out, is that actually what you want? But it's, sometimes you get tired of being in that driver's seat, and that's understandable. But at the same time, then you don't get to be like, well, I'm disappointed and upset because you didn't know exactly what I wanted, because it's not fair to anyone. It really isn't. And also like, I got exactly what I wanted for Mother's Day. I got a beautiful bouquet. I got donuts in the morning, and I got time alone to drink my tea. And that's what I asked for. So, but it's hard. Like, it's not something I'm used to doing. But I have to thank like all of the mom Instagrammers that I follow who said that, like leading up to Mother's Day, they were like PSA, ask for what you want.
Yeah.
Otherwise you're going to be disappointed.
Yeah,
And
you
I
are. You
think
are.
that's, yeah.
Yeah, the major
Mhm.
lesson I learned. And then also like knowing that it doesn't have to be like breakfast in bed.
No,
Like
can
all
be
of the
whatever you
cheesy
want.
stuff you see, it's like, no, a lot of times I actually want you to take my child just away for like, to your
Mhm.
point, 30 to 40 minutes.
Yep.
So I can drink my coffee hot, or I can
Mhm.
just lay in bed an extra 10 minutes without
Oh
feeling
yeah.
obligated to do something. So yeah, that's pretty crazy.
It's the alone time. I think that's like literally what every mom wants, is just to
Yeah.
be alone.
Well, and then
That's
too, I
so
think
terrible.
no, I think, and part of me is what I've struggled with is, while being a manager and a first time mom, it's like, okay, I'm responsible for these human beings to a degree, right? Throughout a day. And then I'm done. And then immediately at 4 or whatever time, either I go pick up Manny or he gets home.
Yeah.
I feel like I want to be with him. So then automatically I'm in charge of him. What are we doing for dinner? Like, thankfully we use a food, we do Dinnerly, which is like they ship you the meals. So I'm like, okay, at least that's a little easier, but still it's like, now I'm
It's
like
the
a
mental
mom.
load never
Yeah.
stops
Yeah.
though. Like, no, Ron and I had the same conversation. I think I had told you about it when we were in Denver, is that like I showed him something on Instagram, like a toddler mirroring something. And I was like, look, like Lily just did that last night. And he was like, yeah, and did you notice like when you talk about work, she like gets really serious and looks down and like seems really sad because you're always so frustrated or like grumpy about it. And I was like, well,
Wait a second.
you don't get to say that. And we talked about it. Like I pointed out to him, it's the same thing. Like I work from home. We have an amazing nanny that we share with a family down the street. So some weeks Lily's here, some weeks she's over at the other family's house. But like ultimately, who's doing drop off, who's doing pickup, who's thinking about like the meals for that week? It all falls on one person. And then when the day ends, or whenever the nanny clocks out, I'm the one at home with her, and my
Mhm.
husband is still at the office until 5:30 or 6, and like I pointed out to him, I was like, this is like a lot to like not have a break. You get to drive home, and that might not feel like a break to you, but the thought of being in a car and being able to listen to NPR for an hour before I get home would be I would love that. I
Yeah.
used to I used to not love my commute, but I love being in the car and just being able to listen to the radio. And
Mhm.
it's not something I get to do anymore.
Yeah.
But you get that every day. And that's a mental break you get to take before you come in and you put on your dad hat for the evening. And you
Mhm.
walk in and she runs up and gives you a hug and a kiss.
And
She
you're
doesn't
the
do that
fun
with me.
one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's something most recently I've been struggling with, and I've tried to like convey it to him as well. Is like, I usually am more stern. Now, again, we were both raised differently, and there's things we want to keep and we like want to change from like the way our parents parented us. But I'm like, because I can be a little bit more firm, or because like I also have bigger responsibility at my work. Not that he doesn't, but he's an IC. So again, full control of his calendar, how he does things.
Yeah.
Like I go from being responsible for 6 people to then being responsible for Manny. And it's like, it's just a lot on my mind. And I have a little bit short of a fuse. So then you're looked at as like the fun dad because you're like ready to go and all this stuff. I'm like,
Mhm.
so do you think it's like fun being the one who thinks about like all of these things all the time during the day, and then also being viewed as like the one that's not as like the fun parent? And so I try to remind him and put that perspective out there, but I do think it's just like an ongoing like
Oh,
journey.
and it's like one more thing that you're like, now I have to sit down and have this conversation with you instead of being able to like sit down and watch like RuPaul's Drag Race and like turn my mind off for a minute. Like those are like, it's like, I don't want to have these conversations
Yeah.
sometimes. Like, I don't want to be the one bringing up the hard topics I know like they need to happen, but like at the end of the day, this
And
is
it's so
not how
funny.
I
It's
want to
like,
spend my evening.
yeah, that's so
State
similar to
of the
our
Union.
relationship. Yeah, because I'm like, well, if I don't bring this up, or if I don't talk about how we need to find more time for each other, you're not going to bring it up, and then we're
Yeah,
not going to do it,
he
and then
doesn't
I'm going
think
to
it's a
get
problem.
frustrated. So it's going to be forever. Yeah,
Oh, it just goes
we're the
on
same
and then we
person.
die.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
All
it
right,
took a
Visha,
really
well,
dark note.
well, on that note, no, just kidding. Thank you so much. I think, yeah, I don't, being all remote now, and I think how we work, it's like, it is really hard to find that time to talk. I know like the RDs try to set up time for like us all to catch up. And the reality is, it's like, it's not like this. So I'm so glad that you were able to join. I know you had to change a few times just
I
because
know.
good
Thank
old
you.
segment always has things that pop up. But no, this was fun. This was super insightful. I also feel more at ease too with some of the ways I think of things, because I think you and I are similar in a lot of ways. And
I think so too.
yeah, I'm excited to Slack you once I'm back from recharge.
Oh, I am so jealous. I hope you enjoy the rest of your recharge. And I loved talking to you. I'd be happy to come back anytime.
Oh, I'm sure there's a lot more we could probably cover. All right, Avisha, well,
Thanks so
thank you
much.
so much. Take care. Bye.
Bye.